Most people think beer is simple. You open the can, you hear the hiss, you feel the cold metal in your hand, and your brain fills in the rest. Beer is supposed to be honest. Water, malt, hops, yeast. That's the story we're told. But here's the question almost no one asks. When you buy beer in America today, are you actually drinking beer? Or are you drinking a product engineered to behave like beer while quietly abandoning what beer was meant to be? Because something didn't break in the American beer industry. It shifted. The brands didn't disappear, the labels didn't change, the commercials never stopped. Everything stayed familiar enough that no one felt alarmed. But behind the scenes, priorities flipped. Flavor gave way to efficiency. Brewing gave way to optimization. Ingredients became inputs. That's why so many popular beers feel thin. That's why the flavor hits and vanishes before you can register it. That's why you can drink several and still struggle to describe what they tasted like. That emptiness isn't an accident. It's design. After digging into brewing methods, ingredient lists, and industrial shortcuts, a clear pattern emerges. Some of the most recognizable beers in America are no longer built around taste or tradition. They're built around scale, speed, and control. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the most influential example of all. Bud Light isn't just a beer, it's a default. For decades, it's been the automatic choice at parties, barbecues, stadiums, and tailgates. The beer you don't think about, by design. Bud Light was never meant to be memorable. It was meant to disappear. From a brewing standpoint, everything about it is built around neutrality. Not flavor, not character. The goal is to remove anything that might slow consumption. That's why it relies heavily on adjunct grains like rice. Rice ferments efficiently, adds alcohol, and contributes almost no flavor. In industrial brewing, that's not a flaw. It's the point. What you're left with is a beer with almost no malt depth, minimal hop presence, and no real finish. It hits cold, registers briefly, and vanishes. That vanishing act matters. The faster the flavor clears, the easier it is to take another sip. Behind that simplicity is intense control. Bud Light is engineered for consistency above all else. Every batch must taste identical, no matter where it's brewed. Yeast character is stripped away. Variation is eliminated. Sameness is the product. Even the alcohol level is calculated. Low enough to encourage volume, high enough to deliver the effect. The beer becomes a delivery system, not an experience. You're not meant to notice it. You're meant to keep drinking. That's why people struggle to describe what Bud Light tastes like. Not because they lack words, but because there's very little there to describe. Cold, wet, lightly alcoholic. Bud Light isn't trying to be good beer. It's trying to be the absence of beer. Natural Light takes the same philosophy as Bud Light and pushes it even further. If Bud Light is designed to be invisible, Natural Light is designed to be forgettable. It occupies a very specific place in American beer culture. It's cheap, abundant, and almost always consumed in situations where taste isn't the priority. That reputation didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of deliberate brewing choices. Natural Light is built to be as neutral as possible, while still legally qualifying as beer. Even lighter body, even thinner mouthfeel, even less contribution from malt or hops. It rides that narrow margin aggressively. What's happening here is dilution, not by adding water at the end, but by formulation. High attenuation fermentation strips out residual sugars. Minimal hopping avoids bitterness. The beer isn't rounded out, it's hollowed out. There's structure, but no muscle. Corn and rice adjuncts do most of the work. They ferment quickly, produce alcohol efficiently, and add almost no body. That efficiency is the backbone of the product. You're not paying for flavor or character. You're paying for alcohol at scale. That's why Natural Light is so often described as beer-flavored water. Not as an insult, but as a description. It delivers cold, carbonation, and alcohol, and little else. No malt sweetness, no hop aroma, no lingering texture. Natural Light isn't asking you to enjoy it. It's asking you to tolerate it. It's built for situations where beer is present, but beer itself isn't the focus. And once you see that, it's clear this isn't neglect. It's intentional design. Milwaukee's Best is often dismissed as a budget beer, and that assumption lets it avoid deeper scrutiny. People think it's bad because it's cheap. The more revealing question is why it tastes the way it does, because the answer exposes the priorities of industrial beer. Milwaukee's Best is built around extreme cost efficiency. Every ingredient choice, every process decision, every shortcut is aimed at producing alcohol at the lowest possible cost per unit. That means heavy adjunct use, minimal hopping, and fermentation profiles optimized for speed, not nuance. The result is a beer with a noticeably rougher profile than other light lagers. There's often a sharp finish, a faint metallic edge, and a sweetness that doesn't quite resolve. That isn't imagination. It's what happens when efficiency is pushed without investing in balance. Unlike beers that carefully smooth every edge, Milwaukee's Best leaves those edges exposed. The beer doesn't fade away, it drops off. Flavor appears briefly, then collapses, sometimes leaving an aftertaste that feels disconnected from the initial sip. That happens because there's almost no malt backbone to support the alcohol. In better beers, malt sweetness and hop bitterness create structure and resolution. Here, that structure is missing. Alcohol shows up, but nothing holds it in place. Milwaukee's Best isn't pretending to be refined. It isn't selling nostalgia or lifestyle. It's selling volume and price. And in doing so, it reveals the raw mechanics of mass market brewing more clearly than almost any other brand. It's beer reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. Keystone Light is usually dismissed before the joke even lands. It's the punchline beer. But what makes Keystone interesting isn't that it's bad, it's how deliberately empty it is. Keystone Light represents a stage of industrial brewing where the goal is no longer to make beer taste good, but to make sure it doesn't taste like anything at all. From a formulation standpoint, it's engineered for maximum neutrality. The grain bill is stripped to the bare minimum needed to create fermentable sugars. Corn adjuncts do most of the work. Malt exists largely as a technical requirement, not a flavor contributor. Hops are used so sparingly they function as a stabilizer, not a source of aroma or character. The result is a beer with almost no sensory footprint. It doesn't offend, but it doesn't engage either. The most noticeable feature is often the carbonation. It enters cold and lightly fizzy, then exits before your palate has time to register anything meaningful. What stands out is how aggressively Keystone Light is optimized for rapid consumption. There's no bitterness to slow you down, no sweetness to add weight, no aroma to hold attention. The beer doesn't invite thought, because thought would reveal how little there is to notice. This is where industrial brewing crosses a line. Beer stops being something you experience and becomes something you pass through. Keystone Light isn't asking you to enjoy it. It's asking you not to notice it, and that difference matters more than most people realize. Busch Light occupies a strange emotional space in American beer culture. For many drinkers, it's tied to memories rather than taste. Fishing trips, hunting camps, long weekends. It's wrapped in imagery of outdoorsmanship and simplicity, and that imagery does a lot of heavy lifting. In reality, Busch Light is built on the same industrial framework as other mass-market light lagers, but with an even stronger emphasis on softness. The beer is designed to feel smooth, almost slippery, with very little bitterness or structure. That smoothness isn't a sign of craftsmanship. It's the result of stripping away anything that could create friction on the palate. Busch Light relies heavily on adjunct fermentation, with rice and corn providing fermentable sugars quickly and cheaply. The yeast is selected not for character, but for predictability. Fermentation is clean to the point of sterility. Any esters or byproducts that might add personality are filtered out or prevented entirely. This results in a beer that feels easy, but also hollow. There's no malt depth to return to, no hop presence to anchor the experience. The beer flows straight through, leaving behind only carbonation and alcohol warmth. What makes Busch Light effective is how well the branding distracts from the reality. The outdoors imagery suggests ruggedness and authenticity, but the liquid itself is carefully engineered to be as non-demanding as possible. It's not beer built for the outdoors. It's beer built for volume, wrapped in nostalgia. Miller Lite often escapes criticism because it occupies a middle ground. It's not as mocked as some budget beers, and it's not as dominant as Bud Light. But that middle position hides a significant shift in how beer is constructed. Miller Lite was one of the first beers to aggressively market itself around lightness. Not just fewer calories, but lighter taste, lighter body, lighter presence. That positioning required a fundamental change in brewing priorities. Flavor had to be reduced without making the beer unpleasant. To achieve that, Miller Lite leans heavily on enzymatic efficiency. The beer is fermented to high attenuation, meaning very little residual sugar remains. This creates a dry finish, but also removes much of the malt character that would normally provide balance. What's left is alcohol, carbonation, and a faint grain note. Miller Lite does use hops, but primarily for bitterness control rather than aroma or flavor. The hops act as a structural element, not an expressive one. They prevent the beer from tasting sweet, but they don't contribute identity. The result is a beer that tastes clean, but clean in the sense of absence, not clarity. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's nothing memorable either. It's engineered to satisfy expectations without exceeding them. Miller Lite represents a turning point in American beer history, where marketing claims about lightness began to outweigh questions about what was being lost in the process. It's not offensive, it's just deeply optimized to avoid being noticed. King Cobra sits at the opposite end of the spectrum from light beer, but it suffers from a similar problem for very different reasons. Malt liquor is often misunderstood as simply strong beer, but the reality is more complicated. King Cobra is brewed to maximize alcohol content efficiently. That means a heavy reliance on adjunct sugars and high-gravity brewing techniques. Instead of building alcohol slowly through malt complexity, fermentable sugars are added to push alcohol levels upward quickly. This creates a beer that has weight but not balance. The sweetness is pronounced, sometimes syrupy, and the alcohol presence is obvious. Unlike light beers that disappear too quickly, King Cobra lingers too long, leaving behind a cloying finish that feels heavy rather than satisfying. The problem isn't strength. Strong beer can be beautiful. The problem is that the structure underneath the alcohol isn't there. Malt depth is shallow. Hop bitterness is minimal. There's nothing to counteract the sweetness or integrate the alcohol smoothly. King Cobra isn't pretending to be subtle, but it is pretending to be beer in the traditional sense, when it's really a different category entirely. It's alcohol forward by design, and flavor takes a backseat to potency. This makes it a good example of how beer can go wrong in the opposite direction. Too light and it disappears. Too heavy without structure and it collapses under its own weight. Corona Light is perhaps the most deceptive beer on this list because its success has very little to do with what's inside the bottle. Corona sells an experience, beach imagery, sunlight, lime wedges, vacation energy. The beer itself is almost secondary. From a brewing standpoint, Corona Light is extremely thin. The malt bill is minimal. Adjunct grains play a significant role. Hop presence is nearly non-existent. The beer is designed to be as neutral as possible, so it doesn't clash with the image surrounding it. This is why Corona Light often tastes better with a lime. The acidity adds what the beer itself lacks. It provides brightness, contrast, and aroma that the liquid doesn't deliver on its own. The beer is intentionally unobtrusive. It's meant to be consumed cold, outdoors, in warm environments where subtlety is less noticeable. But that doesn't change the reality that, stripped of context, Corona Light is structurally empty. The branding does the work. The bottle does the work. The ritual does the work. The beer simply fills space. And that's the pattern across this entire list. Different strategies, different images, same underlying philosophy. Reduce complexity, increase efficiency, rely on perception to cover the gap. By now, the pattern should feel obvious. The issue isn't that beer became popular, it's that popularity changed what beer was allowed to be. Once scale became the priority, flavor became optional. So the real question isn't which beers are bad. The real question is how you tell when beer is still being treated like beer. Start with ingredients. Real beer doesn't need a long explanation. Water, malted barley, hops, yeast. When corn or rice appears, it's not automatically evil, but it should raise a question. Are those grains supporting the malt or replacing it? In most mass-market beers, they're doing the heavy lifting because they're cheaper, faster to ferment, and easier to control. Then pay attention to body. Real beer has weight, not heaviness, but presence. When you take a sip, it should occupy space on your tongue. It should unfold. If the beer hits cold and then instantly vanishes, that's a sign the structure has been stripped away. That emptiness isn't refreshment, it's absence. Finish matters too. A real beer doesn't rush you. Even light, well-made lagers have a gentle malt echo or a soft bitterness that lingers just long enough to remind you it was there. Industrial beers often end abruptly, like a sentence cut off mid-word. Alcohol integration is another tell. In honest beer, alcohol feels woven in. You don't taste it separately. In heavily optimized beers, alcohol either disappears completely or shows up awkwardly, detached from flavor. Both are signs of shortcut brewing. And finally, consider why the beer tastes the way it does. If the most memorable part of the experience is the can, the bottle, the setting, or what you're adding to it, that's a clue. Good beer doesn't need external help to be interesting. Once you learn to notice these things, you stop shopping by brand loyalty and start shopping by intention. That's when beer becomes beer again. Samuel Adams. Boston Lager exists in a rare space. It's widely available, instantly recognizable, and yet fundamentally different from the beers we've been talking about. What makes it stand out isn't trendiness, it's restraint. Boston Lager is built around malt first. You taste it immediately. There's breadiness, slight sweetness, depth without heaviness. The hops don't overwhelm, but they're unmistakably present, adding structure and balance rather than vanishing into the background. What's important here is how the beer feels. It doesn't rush, it doesn't collapse. The flavor develops, peaks, and resolves. That arc is what mass-market beers removed in the name of efficiency. Samuel Adams put it back. The brewing process matters too. Longer lagering times allow flavors to settle and integrate. That patience costs money, which is why many large brands abandoned it. Samuel Adams kept it because it improves the beer. This isn't a perfect beer, and it's not trying to be. It's honest. It tastes like something made deliberately rather than something engineered to offend no one. That's why it became a reference point for American beer drinkers who wanted more without going extreme. You don't need to be a beer expert to notice the difference. Your palate does the work for you. Yuengling doesn't advertise itself as revolutionary. And that's exactly why it works. It's one of the oldest breweries in the United States, and it behaves like it remembers what beer was before optimization took over. Yuengling Traditional Lager has a noticeable malt backbone. There's color, flavor, and density that immediately separate it from light lagers. The beer doesn't pretend to be invisible, it wants to be tasted. What stands out most is balance. The beer isn't sweet, but it's not thin. The hops don't dominate, but they keep the malt in check. The alcohol feels integrated, not added as an afterthought. Yuengling also resists the modern obsession with extreme softness. The beer has a firmness to it. It doesn't melt away instantly. That slight resistance is a sign of structure, not heaviness. This is what happens when a brewery prioritizes continuity over constant optimization. Yuengling didn't chase trends. It didn't strip its beer down to chase margins. It stayed recognizable because it stayed grounded. For many drinkers, Yuengling is the moment they realize beer doesn't have to be complicated to be good. It just has to be intact. American beer didn't become bad overnight. It was slowly hollowed out. Brands kept their names, kept their shelf space, kept their cultural presence. What changed was what they were willing to remove to make production faster, cheaper, and more predictable. Malt was replaced with adjuncts. Flavor was replaced with neutrality. Structure was replaced with drinkability. And most people were never told, because nothing about the outside needed to change. Once you understand that, the choice becomes simple. You don't need to abandon beer. You just need to stop accepting versions of it that are designed to disappear before you notice what's missing. Beer should have weight. It should have character. It should leave an impression. And when it doesn't, that's not modernity. That's compromise. The moment you start tasting with intention, the illusion breaks. And once it breaks, it doesn't come back. Which of these beers surprised you the most? And if you want to see another breakdown like this, you already know where to look next.